All right, and we are live. Hello for anybody watching. My name is Brian, and this is BMAD Code Live. So excited to be with you for this second episode today. And if you're here for the first time, welcome. I want to thank everybody that's going to be joining us today. I have a really exciting show lined up. We're going to be answering your questions, so if you want to drop some questions anywhere, leave them in the chat. We're going to be talking about a lot of amazing stuff today. The big topic tonight is quick dev, everything about quick dev. Many people are not even familiar with quick dev, and I have one of the primary drivers of the quick dev within the BMAD method with me here today. He's been in software for over 30 years. He's written code for big corporations all over the planet. Microsoft, Oracle, ThoughtWorks, the world's largest hedge fund. And then he traded all of that to work remotely for startups. He started using LLMs for serious coding back in 2025, and like many of us, he ran out of patience with the raw Claude experience and the early LLMs in quite a few months. And about that time, he found BMAD, and he sent in a couple patches. We got to know each other, and I would say it was about version 4, maybe early version 5. Alexey joined the team, and he's been with us ever since, working on a lot of the main features, and he's now become one of our biggest contributors on the open source. I consider Alex my friend, and I'm so happy to have him on the second episode of the show. So please welcome Alexey Verkhovsky. Let me bring him in now. Okay, well, everybody, this is my friend Alexey. He's been with the project for so long. So, Alexey, our big topic for today is quick dev. Last week, in the first live stream, we talked about BMAD Loop, which used to be called BMAD Automator. And we mentioned quick dev and auto dev, and I realized a lot of people just probably are not familiar with quick dev, why we have a quick dev, how it's different from the old one, and how we got here. So I really want to start with, let's go back to when you and I really first met, which was around, I think V5 Alpha is when I kind of really knew who you were, and we started working together. Mm-hmm. And let's talk about those early days when we started talking about the need for a quick dev, or we called it something else at the time, which you can talk about. But how did we get to needing this quick dev to begin with?
Right. Those early days when, the grandfather of my grandfather was hunting dinosaurs with a spear. And we were talking with Sonnet 3.5 and occasionally crying, that sort of story.
The bad old days.
Well, I mean, nothing bad about them. It was just different kind of fun. In any case, yeah. So basically, what I usually tell to people is that all this stuff is a human-machine system, right? Just kind of hand-waving in the abstract a little bit. So there is machine, there is human, and actually both parts are getting smarter as time goes. And like a year and a bit ago was basically medieval times compared to what it is right now. Mm-hmm. And really kind of nobody had any, so like you could just about generate code with LLM beyond the autocompletes and get half decent results, and nobody really knew how to get good results yet, right? Mm-hmm. And the LLMs were not all that great either. I mean, they still have a lot of same problems now, but back in the day it was like literally plowing with a horse.
Yeah.
Now I think we're into the give or take like early steam-powered tractors sort of territory. Mm-hmm. In that sense. So,
mm-hmm. Well, I was just going to ask if you could expand a little bit on that analogy. What is the biggest change that you've seen that has taken us to what you now call the steam-powered?
Well, like for starters, we have sorted out through, I don't know if you remember any of that, but do you remember how the big problem with Claude, and it was, as far as I recall, even bigger with OpenAI stuff at that point, mm-hmm. Was how like you had to literally tell them to stop at the right point. Because they were just kind of inclined to just keep going and, invent all sorts of requirements that you didn't ask them to do.
Yes, yeah.
Remember the one where you absolutely had to say, read this file and follow instead of run, invoke, or execute on any, repeatable prompt that was written in the file. Mm-hmm. So none of that is an issue anymore, right?
Right.
So, and like that was basically what you used to cry about all the time, more or less, or I did anyway, before I, discovered BMAD and other things of that sort. So LLMs were really kind of early stage as far as coding agents are concerned back in the day when it all started, right? And like, keep in mind, this all was, we're talking several months before GitHub issued spec kit. So we didn't even know that what we were doing was called spec-driven development.
Yeah, around V5, I think there was still, spec. Yeah, you're right. SDD was not really a thing yet. Specs were just starting to be talked about, but there was no spec kit. And we didn't have a name for what we were doing. Even in early V5, it kind of evolved around that early time.
Right. And like, nobody really knew how to do it right. So, I guess you had this kind of hunch of, since we don't have a machine-centric way to do it, but this machine kind of feels like, a little bit like a human. Let's just try to apply, what we learned in the human-centric processes and just see what happens, right? Like that was the insight.
Yeah.
At least that it was for me, where I was like, okay, why am I doing this, given that I actually know a better way to pair with some, junior guy who like knows everything but doesn't understand anything.
And that's really what we were doing, right? We were setting up rules or steps or processes. And that is why we have the PRD and the stories and the breakdowns. And we had to give, well, let's talk about before quick dev, right? What a lot of people know about BMAD is you create the list of epics and stories, and then you develop one story at a time. You put the context in there. And we started seeing the promise that we probably don't need to go through these single steps. I think some of the advancements were sub-agents, larger context windows, the ability, like you said, past the dark ages, where the model also just got better at knowing what to do and knowing how to keep track of its own state. So I remember we had an early conversation where we both said, like, there is not this need always to do this heavyweight planning up front. Sometimes you're working in a brownfield project and you just want to get something done. And I think that's where we started talking about quick flow and then quick dev early on. Before, it was 2 or 3 separate skills. And that's where we first started prototyping it, right? I think a little bit after 6.0 or maybe 6.1 came out.
Thereabouts.
Yeah. So what was the original version of quick dev like? And then how did that start becoming your daily driver? Because I think now you basically live in quick dev regardless of what other pieces of BMAD you're using. But there's really 2 ways to use it, right?
Yeah, I mean, more than 2, but I'm basically doing it 20, 30 times a day, give or take. And sometimes more when, I'm doing what you once called epic is the new story, but I guess more about that later.
Yeah.
So, it is how I do pretty much everything that's not a, 2-line trivial change sort of thing.
So the original idea with quick dev that I remember was more than just like simple 2-line changes. It was, you have an idea, what you call an intent, and you don't want to do a heavyweight planning, but it's still a good thing that you don't want to just vibe code it with the LLM. Let me ask the question this way. Maybe what I'm trying to say is, how is quick dev? It has the 2 pieces inside it, the intent definition, I'll call it. Maybe you can name it better. And then the implementation. How is that different than just vibe coding with Claude? And why is it better with the quick dev?
Okay, so vibe coding with Claude
or
is
Cursor.
Actually different, oh, whatever,
Yeah.
Different thing to different people, right?
Mm-hmm.
For example, if you're using plan mode and then you're hitting okay, now build this, you're not actually vibe coding with Claude anymore at that point.
Mm-hmm.
You're basically doing the, most basic primitive form of spec-driven development. If you throw in /review, at the end of it, you're kind of doing it the right way, more or less, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as far as I recall, and that was, medieval ages we're talking about, so my memory is kind of vague of those interesting times. But the whole story was that we realized that the constraint increasingly becomes human attention. Right? So increasingly, you can basically, even if you have pretty high standards of quality of the output, you can let an LLM kind of run autonomously for longer than 15 seconds at that point, really. Right? And so we started realizing that you just kind of repeating these pretty much same 15 turns for every, story-sized piece of development was basically an overkill at that point. So LLM didn't any longer benefit from, that level of detail and steering, really. Because you didn't have to, tell it to stop before it just kind of ran away into the boondoggles. It just kind of knew a lot of stuff that required steering at that point, that required steering before, right?
Yeah.
And so the first question was, okay, how do we make a process that takes a lot fewer human turns?
Okay.
So that I can, like with that level of attention, so we both don't like kind of losing control too much. And I think we both think that human in the loop is an important part of the process. It's just the question of how do you optimize that rather than how do you eliminate that. We are nowhere near actually the question of how do you eliminate that yet.
Well, that's an interesting question. So you say not yet. When do you think we will be at a place where it really is spec in, working code out that we
I don't
don't?
know. I honestly see like absolutely no evidence that we're even getting there. A lot of people disagree with that, but it's like, okay, we've basically taken care of a bunch of accidental complexity in the process. Hallelujah, that's great. But there's still fundamental complexity that LLMs have no bloody idea how to deal with. I was basically kind of writing a bio for this stream. Right? I gave it, a brain dump, whatever it was, couple hundred words. And then I'm like, okay, now take this couple hundred words and make it short. And what does it eliminate?
Yeah.
Everything that's actually interesting in there. So
Yeah,
you
right.
basically a bunch of trivialities. That's it. And that's classical LM behavior. It doesn't know what's important and what's not in any given time.
That's a very good point. To tie that away from quick dev for a second, that's even one of the changes we've been making to all of BMAD is, for example, the PRD. I might have mentioned this in the last live stream, but the PRDs have become large, bloated documents filled with a lot of information. And what we found is originally it seems, I like to say it gives the illusion of productivity. It's very amazing. It used to take weeks or months to create a PRD in an enterprise environment where you need to create these PRDs before AI
and a lot
existed.
of them were created because it was too expensive. Hence the whole agile and all the other stuff.
Exactly. And it's faster and cheaper now, right? You can spit it out, but to your point of it doesn't know what's important or not, when it produces a large document, it has a lot of stuff in there that is filler, or it's telling you stuff that you already know. And so then you actually have to spend more effort going through it to get to the parts that really matter. So there's changes that we're making to that. But how does quick dev help solve with that? Like, I could talk about the PRD and the other ones, how we're improving that situation, but I think it's also related to the dev loop and keeping these intents focused on what's important, so it can build the code for us. What is that distinction for you that makes it work?
So look, the way I see it is there are two fundamental, the most fundamental constraints in this whole process now. One is that no matter what we do, the usable context window doesn't really get much better. right?
Mm-hmm.
So while they were increasing the model size by, leaps and bounds all the time, it was actually getting bigger. Now that the LLM vendors have essentially hit the constraints of the model size, so like how many weights are there in the model, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I can tell, like where it starts kind of losing stuff that happened in the middle of any context and just fantasizing about it, is still at the same point as almost at the same point as it used to be a year ago. So the main lesson a year ago was that you have to watch your context window like an eagle, and once it's 100K or more, you should really start thinking about how to terminate the session and start a new one. Nothing actually changed in the department except, in my head at least, the number now is 150K, right? So it's slightly bigger, but it's not like an order of magnitude since then. So fundamentally, it's still the same number, 100 or 150. And the consequences of letting it run until, about 300 are okay for quite a few scenarios. But I wouldn't want a coding session per se, so something that you need to be precise about what it's doing and what it remembers from the beginning to go that big, right? Like brainstorming where, you're mostly interested in what happened, in the last couple of turns. Yeah, okay, you can, kind of ignore the fact that it no longer remembers what happened in the first 5. Or typically, from number 5 to number 15. Because like first 5, it actually remembers much better than the middle. You can ignore that. In coding, you cannot. And I've had some, experiments along the lines of you just throw a bunch of files at the same session consecutively, right? And you just kind of tell it, okay, but you tell it only in the beginning. So here is, 100 files. Apply this transformation that requires a bit of inference. Let's say, each file 20,000 tokens, give or take, right? And then you watch the result. And it turns out that by the time it racked up 300-400K tokens, even the current, well, this was Opus 4.7, I think I did it with. So not exactly current, but, that was already when they were making the maximum context window 1 million tokens, right? So I was running that stuff a couple of months ago, I think. And you could just see how at around 200,000-300,000 tokens, it just goes. And by 400, it's doing some version of generic, just make it better. It like pretty much completely forgot what I asked it to do with those files.
I get it. So even though the models,
that's the fundamental thing, number one.
Even though the models have switched from like 200,000K to 1,000,000K, what you're saying is in coding, at least, you see them degrade drastically still, even with the newer models at
It's
300 plus K.
It used to be, but it's still very much noticeable at around like 300,000 tokens. It is. And as far as I understand, like that's, I have no reason to understand it this way, but that's just my hunch, give or take. It's a function of the model size. So they have this problem. They mitigate it in, 100 different ways. So they try to make the, decline curve kind of flatter, but you can still see in the research papers from, May this year that it starts declining at about the same place.
Interesting.
It just doesn't drop as fast. Yeah. But it's still there, this whole thing. So anyway, like that's your kind of one, in my opinion, at least, biggest thing that constrains how you do stuff with LLM. The second one is that your own attention is basically the biggest limiting factor. That's the bottleneck.
What do you mean by that? When you say the human attention, can you explain what you mean?
What I mean by that is I can run like 50 quick devs in a row and get some piece of code that will do something. If I'm serious about that piece of code, like I actually needed to do what I needed to do, not generically sort of be somewhere over yonder.
Mm-hmm.
I then need to basically, in any case, review it, test it, fix a gazillion problems that it will create. Find all the God classes like 3,000 line functions. The same problem solved 10 different times, 10 different ways in 10 different places, and so on and so forth. Like all of that stuff is guaranteed to be there,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so by the time I'm doing, my own, let's actually make it sane, let's make it work thing, I'm going to waste a lot of time in this.
Mm-hmm.
And in any case, like, okay, I've got, 50,000 lines of code in a day, maybe, or two, with just waiting for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then I'm going to spend the next 2 weeks actually kind of going through it and fixing it. So even though those like 50,000 lines were written just like this,
Mm-hmm.
actually to get it to the level where it's a product doesn't take 2 days, takes 2 weeks at that point. Right? So who's the bottleneck? The LLM or yours truly in this case?
So that
Obviously,
gets
yours
down to
truly.
the human attention. And
Right.
and Alexey, your frame of reference, you're talking about actually working in an enterprise, right? I guess maybe we should set that up a little bit for people too. This is not hobby work that you're doing. You're working in
Well, the
brownfield
device is
systems.
important,
Yeah.
but we're talking like a million line of code bases.
Is existing legacy code, you're going in there. And a few things I think I'm hearing, but I just want maybe some clarity. And I don't know if we answered exactly how we switched or why we switched to quick dev. I think this is just generally good advice that you're giving, though. So I want to hone in on it. When you're working on a very large brownfield project, maybe it's a very large service, because I get this question a lot, and I think you can help people here. How is it that you were able to work in it where you're able to keep the context window low enough so it can get meaningful work done, without starting to hallucinate, and give you something that you can review and work with it? What
Getting there.
regardless of quick dev or not quick dev? Yeah.
That's basically why quick dev is the way it is.
Oh, well, okay. So explain what you mean there, because before we had quick dev, we had create story, dev story, review story. How does quick dev help in that regard?
So those three things, they do the same thing essentially.
Uh-huh.
Their problem was at that point, and to some extent it still is, but it's a much smaller extent, right? Is that they did it in a lot of turns interactively. So they used to, I don't remember the numbers anymore, but I think to run one story through the whole shebang used to be 30 turns at least, something like that. Right?
The early version of it, yeah.
Yeah, what that meant was you could only realistically run one stream of that, and you were basically steering it all the time. Which arguably was the right way to do it back in the day.
Before sub-agents.
But then the LLMs got better. Even like sub-agents is a whole other story, but yeah, like you've got sub-agents where you could just say, okay, without, writing your own software like Lang something or other and so on, right? Just in the prompt, you could say, okay, this thing, I need it to run in a different context. And like, this is the context for this session. It doesn't need to know any of this other stuff. Just tell it, please go ahead, right? But realistically, like you can do it in a different session without sub-agents either. So I think the biggest story was that the LLMs got more capable and they could be left to their own devices for longer. Like I used to feel that if it's going on for longer than 15 seconds, it's almost certainly doing something bad. That was like a year ago. Now I'm okay with letting it go for 40 minutes at times.
Yeah.
Right? Like depending on what it's actually doing, but it's no longer 15 seconds.
What was the model for you where you made that switch, where you kind of noticed like, oh, I can give it something substantial and go away for 40 minutes?
It was not just one switch. It was actually multiple. So like Sonnet 4 was the first big advance, as far as I recall.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a couple more. And, now we're into Fable and so on. So like chances are I'm actually kind of not. Yeah, I don't know. That's probably not true still. I think 40 minutes is about where I, stop being comfortable now. As in, like, okay, I can let it run for hours and I get some code out of that.
Mm-hmm.
But is it like how much time am I going to spend fixing the problems that were created there?
Got it.
Right?
Yeah.
So like 5 hours is probably too long in terms of, where is the optimum. 40 minutes is probably where it's at, as long as, you do distribute your attention the right way, sort of story.
Mm.
Right.
We just had this question, Alexey, and I think this is an interesting question. Been using it since V4. I have a question. So thank you, Kyle. What's the difference between Story Automator, the loop, and the quick dev loop? I think maybe people are still just not understanding specifically what quick dev is. Quick dev is not a loop per se. Quick dev
Right.
is something that is used by the loop, and there's also a dev auto. Let's spend maybe a minute or two on this question, and then I think we can jump into a diagram of quick dev, which also might help provide some clarity.
So the kind of original idea in BMAD, and it's definitely wasn't before, was that you write a big ish, context for a project. You split it up into epics. You split those epics into stories, right? Like you generate, pretty detailed descriptions for all the epics. And then you go, here is the story. Okay, let's create, a spec for the story, which then becomes a prompt basically for the coding session. So that's the, dev story and create story pair, right? And that alone was 15, 20 turns at the time at that point, because it basically asked you a lot of questions. And at some point, you like realize that most of these 20 questions you answer the same way all the time. And in fact, you could tell an LLM to like, okay, if you know what the answer is, just don't ask me, pretty much, right? That suddenly collapses your workflow by a factor of several times, just like right there. And so then you ask yourself, okay, can we in fact collect all these questions at the beginning and at the end, and make it so that from the beginning to the end, it doesn't ask you any questions unless it absolutely must. And this whole thinking started with, okay, let's write something that's kind of like this, and you throw small intents at it. Right, so maybe you have some story tracker where there is a bucket of whatever, little enhancements, bug records, that sort of story, right? So that's what the quick dev was originally for in our head.
Right.
And then, like we had it kind of evolving for a while. And at some point, we were just like, okay, why not run the story through this thing? Because really, there is anatomically, there's no difference whether your intent is like this big or this big.
Right.
As long as the resulting coding session fits into the usable context window. In other words, the size of your intent has to be small enough that you can actually code the solution for it within those, 100 and a bit K tokens. It's basically the process that's entirely viable. And the story is exactly that sort of size, actually, for the most part.
Yeah, that's interesting with an intent, right? How do you I think that was a good answer. Thank you for explaining that. How do you gauge the size of your intent of whether it's too big or too small? That's a tough thing, right? And people ask this a lot. Like, how do we know, how granular to create, the story? You can break it down into subtasks, maybe, or maybe the
Right.
story's too big, or maybe your story is more epic sized. It feels very vague to me, and this is a question I even ask myself a lot. How do you know when you have it broken down to the right size?
Okay, so the answer to that is going to be vague by necessity because there is no, hard ruler that you can just put to a piece of paper and be like, okay, the story is here, 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 and here, right? Like every inch is a story. That doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, for starters, the LLMs are actually trained on this sort of thing. So when you just tell an LLM, okay, here is a big intent, how are we going to split it so that, each thing that is a standalone unit of work is basically kind of good to be in, one coding session.
Mm-hmm.
It actually gives you the answer that is surprisingly close to good enough, usually. You can basically, like most of the time, you can just rely on that answer and live happily ever after,
Interesting.
right?
Okay.
So that's what happens if we do it with an LLM. The whole other question is, okay, but what happens when you have some story in the story tracker and that's an intent, right?
Mm-hmm.
In QuickDef, there is a thing that basically serves as a proxy for that. And it sounds stupid, but it's actually a pretty useful proxy, turns out.
Hmm.
So like it gets the size ballpark right all the time, in my experience, at least on my projects.
Uh-huh.
And the proxy is basically twofold. One is it says it has to be a single feature, right? So I don't remember exact words, but that's the idea. It's like single thing in terms of, what we're delivering to the user experience. And two, it
Hmm.
says that the expression of intent in the spec, so basically the paragraph says, okay, we're going to do this, like that's the objective
Mm-hmm.
of the coding session, has to fit under 1600 tokens. And like,
Hmm.
that's not a number that, we just invented out of thin air. It's actually research back to some extent. And it's a good number. Like empirically, it just works most of the time.
That's really interesting. What you're describing, would you say, aside from the number piece, right? The 1600 tokens, putting that aside from a second, what I was hearing in the first part, if I translate it to what I think of before we had any of this, before AI, before the BMAD method, was how did we create stories before? We would slice them down so that they're deliverable and testable. I think that's what you meant by a feature. It's
Yeah.
not vertically sliced where one story is the database and one story is, a middle layer. And well, sometimes, but generally,
There are situations where that's the right way to do it, but they're pretty rare.
well, the way I've always done it, at least with Agile, was you want something that you can deliver on its own, ideally a story. But the interesting thing to me and what you just said is the way our system has evolved, and I think the way LLMs have been trained, while they're so good at slicing these things, is because they understand that. That's how we've always written stories in the past, to deliver testable, verifiable, small vertical slices. So it's interesting that works out. But then what you're saying is you take that and you're also counting the tokens in what's generated to make sure that it's capped at a certain rough max, and that also helps keep the intent small enough that the LLM can produce it.
And sorry, the intent size is actually 300 tokens. 1600 is the entire coding agent prompt.
Got it. Okay. So you're keeping the intent is not the story, right? Or is the intent the story for you?
The intent is the first paragraph in the story that basically says, we want to do this.
Okay.
Doesn't
Now,
go in, what are the acceptance criteria? What do we not do? How to do it? None of that stuff.
Some of
Just like,
this. Oh, go ahead.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
Just basically what you would have to tell to, a capable agent so that it knows like what's the idea, what's the objective.
Got it.
That's the intent.
That is the intent. And I think I should mention another reason to use QuickDev maybe versus the other flow. First of all, QuickDev is going to just be named Dev in the future, or maybe it retains the name QuickDev, but it is just going to be the development engine of the BMAD method. The need to write the detailed stories with the filled context, as we did in the past, is going to go away. We'll still have epics and stories, but this dev engine will be the one. So if you're still using the version of the BMAD method where you say, let's create story 1.2, it hydrates it, it's doing all the searching and the many turns that Alexey mentioned. And then you develop it with a separate skill and a separate agent, and then you validate it with a separate agent. That is going away because now the quick dev, basically what we're saying is that is doing all of that for you. What we realized early on is with subagents and this ability to have small scope stories, the machine itself can really handle that orchestration. And we know with Fable 5 now, it can handle much more. It can do very long horizon tasks.
Yep.
So that's why we're kind of going in this direction. I want to show the diagram that I think you have for QuickDev in a second, because I think it'll also help people understand maybe a little bit about what we're talking about. Did you want to switch over and show that?
Yeah, sure. It's already in screen share, I think.
Yeah, let me pull up that view here. So this might help, and I think you've talked a little bit about this, but maybe you can go through this, and this will really help people understand what QuickDev is, what the two modes are in within it, and some of the other stuff we can do with it, so people really get an idea of just all the power with QuickDev and why it's still viable also.
Right. So basically the idea is you start with a small expression of intent, or small enough that it actually fits into one coding session, right? And you end with a solution for that intent that hopefully works and is as hardened as it can be before you even look at anything. So all of your attention is kind of concentrated at the beginning and at the end, and maybe in the middle, though that's optional. And, I don't really do it anymore myself. But sometimes I do. But it's kind of pretty cheap not to look at the spec, but look at the end result. And if you realize that the spec was wrong, just, fix the intent and rerun the whole story again. In any case, so basically, if we look at this diagram, it says, okay, let's start with the initial intent. That's something that comes from the outside, right? What's the initial intent? It can be, story tracker number so-and-so, assuming that your LLM actually knows how to go to your story tracker and look up that number and figure out what that is. It can be just, 2, 3, 20, 300 words about, just a brain dump of what you want to change in the code. It can be epic number 3, story number 10 from, epics.md, which is the output of the planning phase of BMAD, right? So any of that stuff, as long as the coding session is kind of capable of developing the solution within one session, is something you can throw into this as the initial intent. So in that sense, unlike create story, it's basically omnivorous, right? It will eat anything you throw at it. And so the next box in there says clarify and route. What that means is it looks at that intent. First question it asks is it complete? Like, do I have enough knowledge to actually start planning this solution? Or should I ask the human about anything before I do that, right? So keep in mind that, okay, you have, an agent that has access to whatever you gave it access to, but presumably at least it's the source code and maybe some documentation about the project, some context management pieces, whatever, right? And then you ask it to do something. It doesn't really know from any of this stuff before what it is you're asking, right? So there is knowledge here that only exists in your head. And the big question is it the knowledge that LLM can derive from what you already gave it and looking at all these other pieces? Or, it's not derivable, it's just something that you haven't told LLM yet. Or maybe you don't know that something, but an LLM shouldn't guess, it should ask. So that's the clarify part, right? And it really tries to kind of nail it all down at that stage so it doesn't have to ask you anymore. The next story is route, and that's as simple as, okay, is this something, interesting enough to justify this rest of the, boxes and arrows here? Or is it so small that you would just normally, go to kind of raw Claude Code session and just be like, okay, just do this, and I look at it for 5 seconds and we'll live happily ever after. And so it kind of tries to distinguish between those two. For, the latter, there is a what's called one-shot route, one-shot mode, which basically amounts to, okay, let's just ask, Claude to do it, and then we'll run a simple, straightforward review session on that. Because review is still important, even if you're changing, one line of code. And in my opinion, kind of waiting for a couple extra minutes, or with one line of code, doesn't take a couple of minutes, takes like 20 seconds maybe. To get, a different LLM session to look at this change and be like, yeah, there's probably something wrong here, let's find it, right? That's valuable, actually. That's still valuable, even for tiny changes. But otherwise, all the ceremony is out. It's just like change, review. If anything is wrong, fix, commit, live happily ever after. That's the one shot. Anything that's bigger than that goes through the rest of these boxes and arrows. And how that goes is, so far, we basically haven't started any other sessions. We haven't spun off subagents, right? But now we do probably create the first subagent, which is basically called exploration. So, and that's optional. So LLM essentially decides whether it should do it in the main session or it needs a subagent to, look at a bunch of things and summarize them. What's the story there is, okay, I've given you an intent, you as an LLM. Actually, like just before I've given you this intent, you just woke up and everything that happened to, for argument's sake, December of 2025, right? Nothing about this project or anything that happened since that December date. And you're staring at a blank wall which says your name is Claude. You are an awesome coding agent, and there's a bunch of like several pages worth of text that's Claude Code system prompt, for argument's sake. That's all you know so far. And then I told you, okay, actually, your current working directory is ~src/ whatever, and they want you to do like story blah, right? So you read the story blah, maybe, but at that point you're like, okay, so what is this directory I'm in? And that's where you probably realize that, okay, I need to go look at these 500 files in some way, shape, or form, probably find something that's actually relevant. Maybe I don't need to read them all, but just look at their names and do some find and grab, and then I need to read a bunch of them, and so on and so forth. Like, point is that if you're doing that on the main session in a big enough project with an interesting enough intent, you run right out of the usable context window at that point already. And the rest of the time, you're kind of dealing with lost in the middle syndrome. That's a bad idea, as we covered before. So that's the first step. LLM decides if it needs to explore like widely or not so widely, and if it sounds like it's going to be, way bigger than 10, 15,000 tokens of context, spin the subagent and, leave off the summary of that. Next story is plan. Plan, for some reasons that I'm going to go into, happens on the main session. And that's where it turns what it now knows about the project and the intent into the actual coding agent's prompt, aka the story spec, right? We have a template for that in QuickDev, in which I dare say every word of it is kind of written let's just say with blood. Basically, it's kind of all backed by empirical experience and research. Some of it probably is obsolete by now because this was happening like months ago, but we kind of try to keep it up with what's going on in any case. But the point is that it has this intent kind of clarified and distilled at that point and down to 300 tokens or less as the first paragraph, and it says right there, do not change this ever. That's like cast in iron, frozen, you're not changing this, right? That stops a whole lot of fantasizing later, actually, strangely enough. Or maybe not strangely if you're experienced enough with idiosyncrasies of this method. One way or another, the next thing that happens there is basically the acceptance criteria, which kind of nails it down to something that coding agent can then reason about as far as, did we actually fulfill this intent or not? And those acceptance criteria are basically expressed as a couple of different things. One is what's called the IOM matrix. And that's basically the idea of, okay, here's the input, here's the expected output for all the main classes of input that this story, has. Obviously, not every functional requirement fits the I/O, but the good thing about it is if it does, then it's the easiest thing for an LLM to actually reason about. In any case, for all the requirements that didn't naturally fit into this way of expressing, we have the standard acceptance criteria list later. And then also the important part in the spec template is what not to do. Again, it's probably a little less important now, although it's still, I think, kind of good to have. It used to be very important to tell the agent that you're not supposed to do this, 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 this as a scope of this story, because they were just kind of had a massive tendency to run away and do things that you never wanted them to do. And then there is a whole kind of section for later stages to write their own records, essentially. So the usual story, that's the template file. That's what the plan produces, spec file, rather. And that's effectively the future prompt to the coding agent, right? Next box in this diagram is spec review. Like I said, this used to be really important part, in my opinion, at least before. Lately, I'm not doing that for the simple reason of I'm basically okay with waiting for a few minutes, and instead of looking at the abstract specification, looking at the end result and figuring out if there was anything wrong with really my intent or how the spec was written from there. It's just easier for me to do it most of the time that way. I don't even remember when was the last time I looked at the spec file before it finished actually developing it, right?
Alexey, let me jump in there with one question.
Sure.
The process here, we should just let everybody know this is all a single skill. This is all happening inside a single skill versus the 3 separate skills that we would have to do all of this before. When you get to the spec and it says spec review optional, is it always still pausing there to have you review the spec? Or if you don't want it to, is it configurable to just keep going?
It's not configurable as such. We should make it actually configurable, and we should probably default to no review by now. But basically what I do is I just say, / quick def, blah, 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 story such and such, or, bug tracker number such and such, and skip the spec review.
Got it. Okay,
This is
good.
all inference, right? So you can just say things like this, and it will modify its behavior accordingly. And this particularly happens early enough in the session that it still remembers it by the time it hits that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and we got some comments saying yes, definitely make it configurable. So that is something that we'll definitely look at. Yep, that sounds great. Thanks, Lucky.
Right. Okay. So the next story, that's the box that says implement, that's the sub-agent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it a sub-agent? Because basically everything we've done so far, the sole purpose of it all was to kind of get to the point where we have, asked the human a bunch of things. We looked at the brain dumps that the human gave in response, big or small, whatever, right? We reasoned about those brain dumps. We turn it into whatever, basically statement of intent. We can't be talking about less, right? Then we explored the code, this, that, and the other way. We kind of, did some reasoning about how to solve this problem, what the problem is actually for starters, and how to kind of validate at the end that the problem has been solved, that the intent is actually fulfilled, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we squeeze it all into this story spec file, and we give it to a new session that basically, instead of at this point starting from whatever it is, like 150,000 tokens of context already spent on reasoning about this stuff, right? It starts from 1,600 tokens or less that we squeezed it down to. Which, as it turns out, if we do the squeezing right, is a really nice thing for the coding agent, because it then, within its own usable context window can do precise work based on that. And yeah, there is a chance, like any kind of compression is lossy, right? There's a chance that while we were doing this, we have done something wrong, and hence the human in the loop review at the end. But generally speaking, it's been my experience that, maybe 9 times out of 10, I don't actually run anything because that lossy compression is actually good enough. But in any case, like the coding agent starts with a really tight initial context rather than all this stuff that needed to happen before. And that's basically kind of the heart of the spec-driven development idea. It's all about, here is the context window, here is the usable context window, here is how much context you should put at the beginning of the session so that, the coding agent can do a change, the biggest size it can without stopping, but, without going into the fantasy land because of the loss of the middle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So implement kind of results in a diff, essentially. That's the outcome of that. So that's the part that turns your intent into an actual diff in the project. The next question is, okay, do we trust this diff? The answer is an obvious no, right? Like nobody who has done LLM-based development for a day would trust that diff, in my opinion, or at least nobody should trust that diff.
You're talking about the diff of the changed code at this point.
Yeah.
The output of the implement. Yep.
Right. So the output of the coding agent is not something that, I would trust. It's a very questionable thing. And it should be, and it probably will be for years to come, if not decades to come. So the next question is, okay, to trust the diff, I need to review it and test it as a human, right? But can I actually kind of deal with some stuff? Can I ask an LLM to deal with some stuff before I go look at that with my own eyes? Because if there is anything there that could be discovered by a machine and then fixed by a machine, right? The more I can get fixed this way, the less time I have to spend on finding and fixing that myself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so I don't remember when that happened, but that was still medieval ages for sure. Like we were still using horses and plows to, work on these fields. But it kind of dawned on more or less like everybody at the same time that you can actually ask an LLM in a certain way to, do a review and then look at the review findings and, lo and behold, about half of them usually are actually good findings one way or another. Like something you look at and you're like, yeah, I'm glad that somebody brought this up. Thank you very much. And the other half is noise, right? Again, they're not perfect. Nobody is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not perfect in that particular way. The other kind of thing that dawns on you once you start thinking about it, way back in the day, is that the simple, okay, you had your acceptance criteria one way or another, intent, all this stuff, right? Does this diff actually implement those acceptance criteria?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That turns out to be an absolutely useless thing to do, especially if you're doing it in the same session that wrote the code, because it never finds anything. Like all you get out of those things is, yep, everything is hunky-dory. What I did 5 seconds ago is perfect, right? And a way better thing to do at this point is to spin another session, the one that didn't do any reasoning about the solution.
Mm-hmm.
Better yet, not even tell it why this diff has happened, so it doesn't know about intent, doesn't need to know about intent. It's actually a good thing that it doesn't know about intent because it doesn't reason from intent at that point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you just tell it, okay, here is the diff. You don't need to know anything else. Find at least 10 things to fix or improve here.
So right here, Alexey, the reviewers you're talking about over on the top right, there's 3 reviewers here.
Right. That's the first one that we did.
Those are all separate subagents, and they have no visibility. We specifically don't send any visibility of the parent thread into that, so all it knows is here's your diff, find 10 things to fix.
Acceptance criteria audit, which we're still doing, we actually started doing it differently lately.
Mm.
That one knows why the diff has happened, i.e. it knows the intent and the actual ACs. Like it has read the spec at the beginning of its context.
Okay.
The other, we now have 3 in this diagram. There's one missing. Yeah, they basically start with, here's the diff, here's the source code. You don't need to know anything else. Pretty much. And there is a reason for that, and it's not just like, saving tokens in the context. Is it turns out that if you give it the reason, and like the more you give it of the context of the original coding session, the more it tends to fall into basically doing the same reasoning with the same weights and coming to the same conclusions and making the same mistakes. So that's information asymmetry that we're using kind of deviously to get better findings. Right.
Good. Yeah.
Okay, so that whole thing basically started there, right? And then you start looking at the output of this. And I think the first iteration of that was just the code review as a third skill in the, create story, dev story loop.
You're talking before quick dev. We had a separate skill, and now this is all a singular skill. These reviewers, this is actually part of quick dev, right? This is not calling the
It's all
separate
part
review.
of the same flow.
It's all the same flow. Okay.
And so far, like if you skip the spec review, there has been no human attention to anything since the first box in this diagram.
Got it.
Right? This is all agentic. So as far as like I, the human, am concerned, it's just spinning its wheels and doing something for, probably minute number 3 by now.
Nice.
Or maybe 5, something like that. I don't care, right? But when I used to care, sort of, I used to look at these findings all the time. And it was great because, all of a sudden you were looking at things that like half of them were actually valid critique of this diff.
Yes.
One
Yes.
with another, right? And some of them were very valid critique of this diff. Like you looked at it and you're like, wow,
Yeah.
that definitely needs to be fixed. But the other half was noise, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for a while, basically kind of my job definition at that point became a guy who's looking at findings.
That was, I think, one of my unfavorite. I mean, just to take a little side trip here, is that I think was really the valley of despair for me, where it felt like the job was becoming, all I'm doing is looking at the LLM output and trying to actually piece together whether all of these review findings are valid or not. And I do feel like we've come out the other side of that, I think, with advances in LLMs and also just how we're building this. But yeah, I know what you're saying there, where it just seemed like so much of it was just slop. And it was back to this whole idea that the LLM didn't know what was really important or not.
Yeah. So it still doesn't, but
it's gotten better.
It turns out that you can actually get this, bunch of findings from several different review layers, deduplicate them, judge their severity, which it doesn't really do a very good job of it, but the main session that knows why the change has happened is almost okay with it. It like misjudges some of the findings, but as far as like nobody is perfect, humans misjudge severity as well. And classify something that's noise as something that needs fixing and vice versa. It happens. Point is that you can do all that processing and triage the findings and actually figure out what to fix with an LLM without kind of dropping out to the human attention. It's probably a good idea to like show the triage table to the human at the end. Because it turns out that when I'm staring at the thing and I see that it found this like high severity thing that was actually a problem with the intent, right? It just didn't ask enough questions at the beginning because it didn't realize that it needed the answer to some of them. That's a useful signal in the review at the end. But in the meantime, like I can actually delegate all of this stuff to the agentic flow, and I basically still get a better result. Yeah, I drop some of the signal on the floor by delegating, right? But it comes at a really nice win in terms of human attention, because it happens while I'm kind of looking somewhere else. And so that's kind of the other way how this thing basically saves your attention. In this case, it kind of tries to, go find as many findings as it can in all sorts of different ways. Then delegates the triage and, fixing still to the agent. And then you look at the end result. Therefore, well, okay, I think I'm repeating myself. You haven't spent any time while it was happening on it. And you are the bottleneck, not this, right? In the time, you could be working on, an intent for something else or whatever. Like, there's any number of ways to productively spend 15 minutes of your time or however long it takes to finish the cycle.
I watch YouTube, but yeah.
Well, yeah.
maybe I should be working on other stuff. But
that as well. I don't know. I mean, I usually I have 2 or 3 of these things going on. And that's a problem in its own right, because basically you're context switching all the time, and context switching is hard. So you kind of get tired pretty quickly of that. But that's a choice. Like you can basically go all out. You can watch YouTube, whatever. It's a nice choice to have because you're not glued to that session for, it doesn't ask you something every 15 seconds. That's the important part.
My my favorite feature of Claude, and I think it also privately shames me and realizes I do too much multitasking, is the new feature where it just tells me what the hell was going on in the thread because I go back to it and I, for the life of me, can't even remember what we were talking about. So I love that summary, but I think it's also a reminder that I'm just doing way too many things at the same time. But
Well,
it helps. It's fun.
the
So
downside of being able to do so many things at the same time,
yes,
right?
is
Because like
yeah.
you can delegate some of this detailed work to a thing that does it. Okay, maybe it's not as good at it as you are, or maybe it's actually better at some of it than you are. Quite a lot of times it is. But the point is that you can delegate it to something that's just, it's not another human being. It's 100 times cheaper than another human being.
Mm-hmm.
Hallelujah. You can watch YouTube in those 15 minutes if that's what you choose to do.
We got some
But
good questions coming in, Alexey. I want to answer some of them in a second, but I have a quick question first. On this review phase, it's always
yeah,
going to run these 3 reviews here. Now, sometimes you might have something
you know.
that's simpler, faster. What about cost? And can you
Mhm.
control which reviews it's running or not reviewing? Maybe you want it to be not so thorough and just get something done quicker.
Yeah, you can. I mean, at this point, that happened recently, but this is now configurable.
Okay.
So you can customize what reviews you run. You can add other layers. You can add other layers when the something in the story basically looks like there needs to be, I don't know, security audit or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So the answer used to be no, but now the answer is a yes. You can customize this.
Okay, very good. And yeah, that's great too because one of the things we've heard is BMAD is very one size fits all. With the whole customization here, you can tune all of this to your own organizational needs, your own review standards. This is all very customizable. And then also, if you come up with your own reviewers, right, people can suggest new reviewers for them. We can add to it, but you can also add your own there if you don't think, that's sufficient, if you want more or less. This is all configurable now through the BMAD customize skill if people are not familiar with that. So next question, Alexey. Go ahead. Yeah.
I would not actually touch these 4 review layers that are there now. In any situation where it's a decent sized software project that has tests.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of those things should be, carrying their weight and then some in that scenario. Maybe I'm wrong about it. Maybe, there are situations that I'm not imagining right now where, some of this stuff doesn't make any sense. But I have run it on a bunch of different things, and in pretty much all of them, if they are in the shape of, decent sized code base with tests, all of the 4 layers that we have right now are finding things.
Mm-hmm.
They are finding things that you'll be glad that they found. They basically they obviously they find the same things quite a lot of times, but they find things that the other layers don't often enough. And basically speaking, it's the question of, okay, you remove one of these layers, you're just not going to see those findings. You're not going to fix them. They're going to end up in production.
Yeah.
Right? If they end up in production and they were medium, at least severity findings, i.e. defects.
Mm-hmm.
Medium severity, basically by definition, is it's a problem, but it's tolerable for the user. So, yeah, you end up fixing it later, but you still end up fixing it,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully. Point is that if you kind of found it and squashed it for the cost of whatever it is, even if it's 50,000 tokens and an extra 2 minutes of machine time per, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how 50,000 tokens and 2 minutes of time. If it went into situation where it has to be reported, discovered by a human tester and reported,
Mm-hmm.
That's infinitely more expensive already.
Yes.
If it got to production and got reported out of that, that's like infinity squared more expensive already.
Mm-hmm.
So why would you ever want to, drop those review layers? If
Yeah.
your situation is different, like if it's a, small, like toy project, whatever, yeah, you can, just kind of go down to, I would leave the adversarial thing, the, 10 things to fix. I would leave that in any situation, even if it's not a software project, but, you're writing documentation or whatever. Yeah, like the other three are pulling their weight in pretty much any context they can think of.
I think they're good. And the savings down the line, it could get a little bit expensive, right? Like if that's the concern, but you're saving time down the line. I think a few caveats you're getting at, maybe if it's like a hobby project. Also, prototyping. I think prototyping has a place, but then prototyping, you might not even want to do quick dev. That's where we have Fable and these other tools. And there are times where it is appropriate to just give your idea to Claude and see if it can prototype your idea. Don't let your prototype go to production or your final product. As a matter of fact, one thing you can do is you can take your prototype and feed it back through the whole BMAD process if you like what the prototype did, and then actually make a real spec out of it and then build it the proper way. So I think, there's different ways to do it, but I generally agree with you. These reviewers make sense, and I think they're worth their cost, but it is all customizable if people want to customize it. We got a few questions. Maybe let's pause for some questions, Alexey, because I think we got some good ones, and then we can finish this up. So the first question here, I know this is a little bit hard to read. I need to improve this a little bit, but Ebenezer, do I need PRD before jumping into quick dev, or is it okay to skip the PRD?
I used the word omnivorous at some point early in this conversation, right? You can tell it whatever you goddamn please. You don't need PRD. It's good if you have, context. So that's another story. Like a lot of context that a coding session needs is actually in your existing source code.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have, an existing source code that kind of encoded the big choices that you had to make in your original PRD, in my experience at least, like keep in mind, I do prototypes at some, points, but I mostly work on existing code base.
Mm-hmm.
Code base as plural. I only need PRD for the first couple of epics typically, and then I can just, discard the whole thing because, the code itself has all the context that it needs, for the baseline. And LLMs are pretty capable of kind of introspecting and discovering stuff from that.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, like I usually don't do PRDs as such. I use a much more condensed form thereof for starters, because I kind of really try to be very kind of stingy with the context, at least the initial context of anything. And yeah, in my experience, PRD you only need in the beginning. And once you have an existing code base, basically your epics breakdown that you derive from something like PRD is all you really need, plus the source code, of course.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I'm of two minds. I definitely still use PRDs in existing code bases, but this is when it's going to be a very large effort, maybe across multiple teams. I find the PRD is really good, and it becomes a great tool for product managers to help break it down. So this gets more into the enterprise thing. A lot of people are not familiar with this, but the way BMAD has evolved, and especially with V7 that's coming, PRD is not required. I mentioned in the chat a little bit ago. My workflow right now is I mostly start with a product brief, just because I like the process of working with the product brief. It helps me work out my idea, and And then from that, I jump right to the spec. I generate my stories, and then I feed them to QuickDev. There are multiple flows. Another way to answer your question, though, is the reason we created QuickDev, going back to the very beginning, is a lot of times when you're working an existing project, exactly like Alexey said, you don't need a whole PRD because there's just like one thing you want to bolt into an existing system. Maybe you have an API with 6 endpoints and you just want to add a new one. The architecture is pretty much defined. There's already a database. The system is understood how to work. So you can jump right into QuickDev. And if we go back to the diagram that Alexey was showing, let me switch back to that again. At the very beginning, this whole initial intent, clarify, and route, that is an optional piece of QuickDev. If you give it a fully baked story already, it's going to kind of rush through that part. But if you don't, you can just talk to it. And that's what this interview section means here. So you can literally use QuickDev. If your overall idea is small enough in scope, you don't think you need to split it across multiple teams, or, you don't think even for yourself it's going to be, many, many stories, you can just have this interview, create the plan, it will produce the spec, and go from there. I think what it comes down to, in my opinion, is the PRD I really consider closer to the analysis phase. Maybe you want to do brainstorming. Maybe you want to do PRFAC, which is the Amazon way of working backwards to see if it's a good idea to even build the product you want to do. Maybe you need to do market research. If you don't need any of that and you're just kind of working on something maybe small, you could jump right to QuickDev. That's why we really created it. And it will basically combine the ideation, the hardening of your idea, the producing of a spec, and building it kind of all together in this single skill, putting it all together. So that's really the reason. Now, the reason you might do a PRD and still use QuickDev is you still want to produce epics, you still want to produce multiple stories because it's, very large in scope. In that case, then yes. So it's really a judgment call. And then in that case, instead of just starting the initial intent part of the QuickDev with the conversation, you're telling it, we're going to work on story 1.2 next, or 5.6. So that's really the key distinction there for me. So we're very similar, I think, in that regard, Alexey. The next question that we had was, let me put this on the screen. This is a good comment here. So lately I've been using one model for dev and one for review. It depends too much to explain, but some models may be more dev. Oh, it's hard to read on the screen. So some models may be more ADV and better at review tasks. I find that Fable 5 forgets what it's doing. What do you think there, Alexey?
I didn't really use Fable 5 for writing code that much to form an opinion on that. But basically, the answer to that question changes all the time. As models evolve, some of them get better at some things, some get better at some other things. Generally speaking, the biggest win along those lines is if you take two capable LLMs with different weights, right? Preferably with different training data sets as well. So essentially, if you're, using Claude to generate your code and OpenAI stuff to review it, that gives you better findings. And it's actually substantially better findings. And again, like intuitively, the way I kind of understand it is it basically comes from the fact that they reason about things through different paths because they have different weights.
Interesting.
Right. So, and like that's the fact that you get better findings is backed up by all sorts of things from, research to empirical experience of all sorts of people. Like every time you run an experiment like that and an interesting enough change, you should see that you get like 20-30% better findings in some way, shape, or form.
So with our current quick dev, Alexei, let me go back to the diagram again, and then I got another great question I'm going to bring up. But to your point there,
Mhm.
to close the loop on this, this whole skill is using the same model. So when it's using the reviewers, for example, if we're using Claude, the reviewers are running under Claude. They might be running under a different model in the subagent, but
Right.
for example, this is not swapping in codecs
Mhm.
to do the reviews.
So that's basically the lowest common denominator. Like, keep in mind that the open source project should, like, out of the box work on, some pretty interesting environments where, there's only one LLM, or there's like a platform that doesn't even do subagents quick dev, like,
Mm.
can even run there, although
Yeah, we
I
don't count
really,
those. Yeah.
yeah, it kind of can, right?
Yeah.
But now that it's all customizable, you can basically replace an instruction to evoke a subagent with an instruction to invoke a bash tool, and just through that, bash tool do reviews with something else.
Yep.
As long as it's something else kind of knows how to return a piece of text back to the main session, that's really all it takes. And basically, in the what you call it, in BMAD loop, I think it's already there like this, as far as I remember.
Yeah, and that's where the importance of having like a harness, right? That's why we built BMAD Loop, because we can really get outside of the one model. If you want to do it all with Claude, you can. But yeah, in there we can say the reviewers run with codecs or whatever model you want to put in there. That's all configurable, and that's part of the
Right.
reason for that. And BMAD Loop is not actually using QuickDev, right? BMAD Loop is calling another skill, if I'm
Right.
correct.
DevOps basically is the same thing, but no human in the loop at all.
Right. So it follows basically everything, most of what we see here, but it has more of those hooks in it, I'll say, to be able to configure different pieces with different models. And like you said, it's not going to stop and ask for review. So if you see a skill in BMAD called, uh, correct me if I get the name wrong, BMAD Dev Auto, you don't
Yep.
want to use that one if you're driving. You want to use Quick Dev.
Well, I actually use that all the time now.
Well, you can if you want to be totally out of the loop, but if you want to be like the process we're talking about, you because
Well,
people
what I
might
do
get confused seeing the
is
two different skills. Yeah.
here is Debic. I've run story one because I wanted to, make all the choices in story one. Just go ahead and run stories 2 to 10, one subagent at a time using the auto.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
Just
then
going for half an hour, and I look at the end result all
so
the time
people
now.
can use also uh the name is BMAD Dev Auto. If they basically want to be human out of the loop, tell it here's a story to go develop, go ahead and do it. In the future, maybe they will merge into a single skill. I don't know if there'll be a single skill because there's some differences in there, but maybe through some progressive disclosure or some other means, we can simplify the system because they are so simple. But right now, it is two separate skills. So if you see those, hopefully that's clear what that is. But that's probably in our documentation and something that we should clarify. I have a really good question. There's a few good questions, so I want to get some more of these while we have them. Kyle asked another one.
One of
Oh,
the boxes, by the way, sorry to interrupt. There is one last box there
oh wait, let me. Oh,
that says present.
oh, I don't think we finished review either. Before we go on,
Ah, fair enough.
well, I wanted to ask the testing because it's still kind of about the whole loop. So let's answer this testing question.
Mhm.
How does this flow differ in terms of workflow, and do they all follow the same test-driven framework, or is testing handled differently in each? And I think this is talking about back to the question about automator versus loop versus quick dev loop. But just in general, can you talk about, like, are we doing TDD here? Do we have control over what kind of tests it's writing? And generally, I don't see anything about testing in here, so maybe you can talk a little bit about
Okay.
that.
So first thing I'm gonna say is that how you do testing is extremely project specific.
Mm-hmm.
In any project, there's gonna be layers that you don't test. There's gonna be layers you test one way. There's gonna be layers you test the other way, and so on and so forth, right? So how I inject that stuff into this particular process? So a single quick dev iteration or devote iteration is I have it kind of very briefly described in CloudMD or AgentsMD. Generally in all of my projects by now, they are like one is Symlink of the other. Because I'm using multiple LLMs to do stuff, as we discussed before. So you mentioned there that, the tests live here and this is how we test. You don't need to say much more than that, usually because, as I said before, LLM is pretty good at just looking at what you have and, doing more of the same in the code. There is an instruction in there at the end of the coding agent to basically get it through the whatever deterministic quality gates that includes the test you have that are kind of applicable for this change. Recently, we've added another reviewing layer, which is called verification gap finder, which is different from the other things we have because what it does, like those other layers, they're looking at, is this code correct? Meaning, can we find some problem with it, right? That one, the verification gap hunter, asks an entirely different question. It says, okay, if this code was broken, will we have a gate that actually found it? And like, it's not in this diagram. It happened later than this diagram, but it's there now. It's one of the 4 default layers at this point.
One of the reviewers. Okay.
So basically between, kind of having the tests in your code base, having an instruction about, okay, there are tests, actually. You don't really need to say much more than that usually. Or maybe you should say, okay, there are tests like this is testing this layer, that is testing that layer. And, we only do kind of smoke level testing for the UI. So, don't go ahead and write more UI tests, maybe. That's kind of my default take, although it changes now, I think. But so far it's been. Point is that between that and this verification gap finder, you take care of basically having tests with every change, like adequately covered. Okay. Second point is this whole TDD stuff. I used it all the time when I was, programming by hand. Not all the time, actually, I'm lying. I used it where I felt it was appropriate, which usually would be some algorithmically interesting change that like doesn't amount to, let's take this bunch of bytes and kind of pass them from one pocket to another through 5 layers until they are visible to the user in some way, shape, or form, right? Those things like TDD doesn't really do much for them, even when you're writing it by hand. But if you're doing something like, okay, here is the abstract syntax tree, and we need to figure out if this site or this node is like this, that, or the other, yeah, that's TDD all the way, right? Used to be. Turns out that, at least in my experiments and a bunch of research I looked at, the notion that it helps an LLM to do anything is really questionable. Like, in my experience, having that instruction to write tests first and not having that instruction to write tests first creates exact same results most of the time. Sometimes they are kind of a little better, sometimes they're kind of a little worse, but it's not a life-changing clause, and it just basically creates more inference. So it makes the whole process costlier somewhat, not by much, and it doesn't make it better.
I think it depends on the model too. Yeah, I mean, I'm with you there. I think we should clarify too, because people, much like vibe coding, TDD means different things to different people. Having good unit test coverage is a good goal, and I see it helps the LLMs. You want to have good unit tests. I want to be clear here. Yeah. And some people do equate good unit test coverage with TDD.
No.
From Alexey's and I's background, what classical TDD actually meant was you write the failing test, you write just enough code to make the failing test pass, and
write the next
then
step.
and then you refactor it. And that's another piece that people forget is you then actually refactor the code. I think that I think the jury's still out on it. I mostly agree with you, but I think there's probably some valid ways to show that some level of TDD could help the models. But what we're doing with the BMAD method by breaking things down into good small specs and intent is in a way kind of solving the same thing, in my opinion. When one of those two models came out, they showed something from Anthropic that said you get X percentage better results, some crazy claim like 50% better results if you follow TDD.
In benchmarks.
Well, not only in benchmarks, but they were saying like in use they were doing it. But here's the problem with that is true if you compare that to pure vibe coding, right? So if you just say like, hey, develop the SaaS app for me, yeah, it's going to go off the rails. Now, if you say no, create unit tests or follow TDD, and here's the 5 scenarios that you got to follow. Write those tests first and then write the code. Of course, that's going to work drastically better because you have no other structure in place. But when you have the structure that we're talking about in place, where you are breaking down things into small intents, you are doing the reviews, I think what you're saying is then whether you write the tests first or write the tests after, it's not going to make as much of a difference. But people hear these big numbers, but you got to understand that when they throw out those big numbers, A, they're benchmarks, right? And a lot of the benchmarks are suspect to begin with. But B, they're not following any process. So if you're not following any process and your only process is here's some tests, make sure this is what you do, well, then of course that's going to be so much better than just a vague, build Minecraft for me, right? Like it's two very different things. So
I can sorrowfully rant about benchmarks that we used to.
Let's save that for another one, so we can get back and finish this. Wait, there was another great question, and I lost it, Alexey. But let's get back to the diagram so we can wrap up the quick dev. So I think where we left off though is all these reviews are happening. Can you clarify? Are we talking about loop engineering here, where it's actually going to take the findings and fix it itself, or do you have to still review all the reviews and tell it to fix something that it found?
Okay, so that's like part of the delegation that happened in quick dev, and we later tried to propagate it to code review actually to the old stuff. But it turns out that in code review you can't really propagate it the same way because it's a separate session. It doesn't have the planning context in it, right? And it cannot actually kind of just roll back. So anyway, let me talk about what it does first.
Mm-hmm.
So you have these review layers that look at, the diff and whatever else they look at in 4 different ways. They produce what we call findings, which are basically, okay, I think you should change this because whatever. Then keep in mind that 3 of the 4 don't know why this change happened, and at least one of them is explicitly told to keep reasoning until you either find or fantasize something to fix. Right? It doesn't say or fantasize, but in reality, on a small change that doesn't really have much of anything to fix, he'll give you 1 low severity findings and 9 items of noise, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So the next thing that we need to do, and I used to do it by hand, we all used to do it by hand, until we realized that it was quite a lot of time that went into judging noisy findings. And I actually had a great process for triaging findings by hand. It's still sitting there somewhere in one of the BMAD repos, and I've never used it for the last 2 months, but it was awesome while I was using it.
Mm-hmm.
Next to actually doing it one at a time.
And why don't you need that now?
Well, I do actually, but not that much, because what we're doing instead, we're delegating the judgment to an LLM, right? So how we do it? In that skill, at least in quick dev.
Yeah, let me go back to the diagram. Okay.
Basically, keep in mind that the main session, right?
Mm-hmm.
It has clarified the intent, has done all the planning, right?
Okay.
So has great context about why this change has happened, what it was trying to do. And now it has all these findings from all these view layers. Turns out that it's actually the best session there is to judge the severity of these findings and whether they're noise or not.
Okay.
Not perfect, right? There's nothing perfect about any of this,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like practically good enough most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very cheap. That's the most important part, right? So it basically looks at these findings. It figures out, the severity and whether they're noise or not. It also figures out something else, which is at which point of this process has the problem actually been created. And it can be that, okay, the coding agent just made a boo-boo. That's like vast majority of them, the ones that are not noise, right? Fine. It can also be that the coding agent was given a wrong instruction by the spec. And it can also be that we actually had to ask some question about the intent. So a piece of information that only exists in the head of a human, not in the, code base or anywhere, which we didn't realize when we were asking these questions at the very beginning. So it wasn't there to write the spec, and therefore, that created a problem. And so basically, like one thing that this quick dev thing it does is it says, okay, depending on at which stage of the process the problem has actually happened, it's probably, instead of like trying to ask, an extra question to the human and then patch the diff, it's usually better result if you just discard the whole shebang and start from scratch. Right? So from scratch, meaning from the statement of intent that now has the information that the whole process was missing. Likewise, if the problem happened when the intent was being turned into a spec, so IO matrix, acceptance criteria, what not to do, and so on and so forth. Instead of trying to patch this, it's usually better to discard the diff, go kind of write a better spec, and regenerate the diff from that point, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the loopback. That's the weird arrows kind of going not from top to bottom, but in the opposite direction.
On the sides, yeah.
Lastly, if it's really just, everything was hunky-dory with the intent and the spec, but okay, the coding agent just missed something, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's fine. You can patch it. Okay? So patching means basically you don't go regenerate anything. You just, make a little extra change, and that just makes it better somehow. Like, point is that patching is not always the right strategy. It used to be when we were doing it by hand because, regenerating a 300-line piece of work by hand is stupid and expensive. These days, regenerating it takes you like 2 minutes extra, maybe. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not stupid and expensive. It's actually smart. And it turns out that, again, like what we're trying to minimize here is defects escaping to later stages where they become exponentially more expensive to fix, right? Because like somebody has to find it, somebody has to like feel the pain, report it back, like figure out what the pain actually was, if it's a bug or a feature or whatever it was, and so on and so forth. So like, and the defect that escapes from here to production is 100 times more expensive than something that just gets fixed by a human.
Mm-hmm.
If it gets fixed by a machine, it's infinitely less expensive, pretty much.
Mm.
Like you can think about it this way and you're not that wrong. Right? So hence the kind of, and that's not like anthropomorphic process at all. You wouldn't do that if you're doing this by hand.
Right.
But once, like, since it's a human machine system, and like this particular piece of accidental complexity has been largely solved, right? we now have a luxury of just go back to wherever the defect was introduced, discard everything else, and fix it.
Mm-hmm.
At least on this level. Like, I wouldn't do it on a project. Unless it's like really something like, we discovered that we didn't really need to build this at all. But for like single story, it's really cheap. It's like 2 minutes worth of inference and maybe one extra question or 2 extra questions to the human being. That's it. Okay. So that's the triage and the loopbacks. The only problem with that is, at least in theory, I don't think I've like seen it in practice more than once. But in theory, since you're now having a loop, this loop may not converge, right? So it could just oscillate between, okay, we fix the spec this way, we get this problem. We find this problem, we fix the spec the other way, we have this other problem. And we just like maybe go from one problem or another, or just keep switching between problems, right? So the number of these loopback iterations is capped at, as far as I remember, 3. But that's about it. And like really, like vast majority of the time, even if it has to go back and fix something up at the early stages, it just kind of converges into, maybe one medium, few low findings and not noise. We just kind of fix and live happily ever after in one iteration. Usually that's the story.
Nice.
So the loopback is there, but it's not that expensive to do. The other thing that we haven't talked about yet, which is, in my opinion at least, was at the point where we introduced it, was a revolutionary thought pretty much, is that piece at the bottom, which is at the right corner, that says deferred work.md.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that. So yeah, please explain that.
Okay, so one of the ways in which manual triaging of agentic review findings really, what's the word I should use here? Okay, it was really bad for your mental health, let's put it this way, was this. Okay, so like noisy findings are actually pretty easy to kind of eliminate, right? You just look at it, or maybe you like let the LLM look at it, and you're like, yeah, that's actually BS finding, never mind. And by the way, like some of the BS findings are BS as such, but they actually triggered you thinking about stuff that you were like ultimately glad that this like wrong finding was brought up to your attention, because you realized that there was actually a good finding behind it. It's just like it's saw some smell but didn't realize what the problem was. Anyway, like LLMs are not great at doing that sort of inference. I dare say I am, but okay, I'm kind of happy to leave it on the floor because saves my attention, right? But the other kind of finding that really made your life miserable, strangely enough, was this. Something that existed in the code base for like a couple of years, right? And you just touched something that was, loosely speaking, related. And this, cynical kind of simulated person that, just kind of, everything is crap, right? Let's find 10 things to fix or improve. Just looked at it and went, oh, okay, I found the thing to fix and improve. It has nothing to do with the story you're working on, but
yeah,
sure as hell wants to be fixed or improved, right?
Right.
So what happens then, if you are doing this naively, like as we used to, you look at this finding, you go, gee, I really, wish I knew about it before, but, now that we're looking at it, let's go fix it. What happens then is you go on this tangent, right? So you now context switch from the story that you're doing into this other thing that's really good to fix. And what often happens is you start fixing it, you realize that it's layer upon layer upon layer. So before long, you have spent like 2 or 3 hours trying to fix or improve this thing that had nothing to do with the story you're supposed to deliver, right? This like existed in your code base since time immemorial and nobody really cared. I mean, like people maybe kind of cringe looking at it every once in a while, but okay. So, and like the revolution was Along the same lines, like, okay, that's a good finding to fix, but let's actually, instead of fixing it right away and ending up with a, bloated diff that kind of goes into all sorts of nooks and crannies in the code base that we're not supposed to go in the story,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like big diff that does multiple things sucks to review as well.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, instead of actually making it fix, we go, okay, you know what? This is a good finding. I really want to remember that it existed, but I don't want to deal with it right now.
Yeah.
And I don't want to even look at the diff that deals with it right now. Because that, has all the risks of, taking, if not me, the coding agent on a trip to some, other lands. So instead, we just write this writing to a file. We just append it, right? We don't even try to deduplicate it. So you usually will wind up with the same finding being discovered 15 different times before you actually start dealing with it. But at this point, your story is an atomic diff that actually addresses the intent. It doesn't go into these kind of side quests.
Mm.
And you have this record of things we discovered that looked worth improving or fixing, which were not related to the story. And at some point, when your attention is not focused on the story, you can always go to, and I kind of tend to do it once every week or 2 or 3, thereabouts, right? That's the cadence. You go there, you accumulated maybe 40 findings, of which maybe once you deduplicate them, maybe there's 20, right? Something like that. You kind of go there and you say, okay, which of these 20 are actually worth fixing? Because keep in mind, the answer is not many usually.
Yeah.
Because if it's a pre-existing problem that it just found that was not related to the story, chances are that, okay, it's a problem, but, nobody has really faced it strongly enough to be worth fixing, maybe. So you have to aggressively, I would say, filter those things out after the LLM deduplicated them.
Mm-hmm.
So you wind up with maybe 5 things to actually fix or improve after a couple of weeks worth of work. Fine, you spend some time on fixing or improving it, live happily ever after. You do not context switch from the actual change that you wanted to make to your software. That's the difference. So that's the deferred work piece.
Yeah, I wish I had something like that in my career. And even some of my pull requests that you've commented on, because not only the LLM, but I love that when I'm in code, I love refactoring. I think it's like my funnest thing to do. And then next thing you know, you've rewritten the whole code base and your simple change is, 30 files and as somebody mentioned in the chat, change to Rust, might even decide to change the language around. So I wish I would have had something to smack me around like that and just say no, deferred work. But yeah, no, I love the deferred work. How do people get back to using it though? Like when you have this deferred work, it's building up over time.
Mhm.
It sounds like you say, okay, this is great. We'll do it later. I'm going to keep going through the stories in the epic.
Yeah,
Would
you
you
have to
then,
have
after the epic, go back to the deferred work? Yeah.
Just every week or 2 or 3, whenever you feel like it's, a big enough file. So typically, what I do is I basically do, epic checkpoints every day,
Mm-hmm.
or however kind of many epics I have in a week. But point is that okay, a bunch of stories that are all somehow or other associated with one another. Maybe they're delivering a feature, maybe it's a kind of big refactoring. Basically, a story is something that fits one coding session, right?
Yeah.
Not everything can be splittable into one coding session at a time. So you have epics, which are basically, it's in some shape of, in some sense, the same thing, but it's more than one session. Okay, fine. At the end of that, I do the checkpoint for an epic, and I just look at the deferred file, and I'm like, yeah, that's kind of already big. So that's how I know that it's time to go look at it. And I don't go look at it right at that point, right? Because I'm still focusing on the epic at hand.
Mm.
But that's how in my head, like the flag gets kind of flipped that, okay, now this deferred work stuff is big enough to be worth spending a few hours to go through.
Yeah, that
And
makes sense.
basically, yeah, that's about it. And like you can put it into version control and, accumulate it from multiple people. Like keep in mind, this thing is append only in the quick dev, right? So it doesn't try to like deduplicate or anything else. So even if you have multiple people kind of committing changes to it, it's all append. So there is no merging involved.
Yeah, this is
Then,
what I would call tech debt. A lot of times what we'll do is we'll take this deferred work, we'll just put it in our backlog, and eventually, we get to it when there's some downtime.
yeah.
Maybe,
So
yeah.
one of the ways that actually triage deferred work ends up in is I'm like, okay, this is great finding. I want it to get fixed. I create a story in the story tracker and I delete it from the deferred work file.
Exactly. I think that's a really good approach. So like even if you're not going to fix it at the end of the
Mhm.
epic or every once in a while, try to burn down that list, get it small, and either, like you said, delete it or triage it. We're hitting about the 2 hour mark, Alexey. I want to finish the quick dev, so we've got our reviews. Let's just wrap up the present and result, and then I have another question or two for you. But let's go ahead. Let's finish this up.
Yeah, so basically the idea is that if you're using QuickDev, right, you're doing one story at a time with the human in the loop checkpoint at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Human in the loop checkpoint at the end is the productivity bottleneck in the story by definition, pretty much. Like, if that's how you're doing things, which is actually a good way to do things if you really, really care about, quality of the output.
Yeah.
You're probably spending 50% of your time in doing these review stuff while you're working on code, ostensibly,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the next question is, what do you need to actually do reviews effectively? And I don't have a great answer to that, I must say. But at the very least, we can say that, okay, you know what? You have this spec file, which is kind of really condensed explanation, at least the statement of intent piece of that, right? Really condensed explanation of what the change actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And why don't we, write to the end of the spec file something like, okay, to review this change, you start, in this piece of code, you look at that, then you go to this piece of code, you look at that, and so on and so forth, in some sequence that's kind of top down from more abstract to more detailed, rather than how it is usually in the diff viewer, where basically diff viewer is like more or less alphabetically sorted by, directory name and then file name, right? Which is never the right way to look at any diff, really. It's just like the only ordering you can do if you know nothing about the code semantics.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like reasonable ordering with that constraint, but with LM, you know about code semantics. So you can at least kind of generate some narrative of, this change starts here, and like then it goes to here, to here, and to here. So that's what this present box is trying to do.
Mm.
And it can even automatically open the spec file in VS Code. Like where it kind of falls apart a little bit is there's no way to have a clickable diff viewer that actually shows you the change in that file. So yeah, you have like clickable links to the file and line number, but what they really want is a clickable link to a diff of that file. That doesn't exist, and therefore this present box is not all that great. But I dare say it's better than nothing for reviewing the change.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what it is.
And then the result there is that just means you're done after the present, or is there something there?
Yeah, pretty much.
Got it.
So
Cool.
the result is you have a diff, you have a spec file. You basically have, some agentic findings about triage, then introduced into the diff, the changes, the fixes. You have this, narrative about what actually changed in the code and why. And you look at it, you probably, tell an LLM right there and then to fix something or other. End of story.
I like that. A lot of times, what we're doing in actual team environments, where we're working in a larger project, we take the present and then it's other people also reviewing. So, most real world situations, especially if you have any kind of compliance needs, you're not reviewing necessarily your own code. But what I've been seeing a lot is even other people that are reviewing your code now are using agents. They're using CodeRabbit. They're using other processes to review your code. And usually that is the gate to go to the main branch and then actually go all the way out to production. So I think there's two different things that we're probably talking about to clarify. One is reviewing it, for yourself or so you can merge, but then that actual gate to allow it to go all the way to production if you're like in a team environment. Could be a whole other topic on, code reviews, but
that's not session, right?
Yeah, that could be a whole other session. So
it must be. No, I mean in an LLM session.
Oh, well, definitely another LLM session. And, testing and verification, it's a bigger topic. One thing I wanted to say is the key difference we're talking about here, because you really have three options. One is quick dev, like we just showed it, where you get to the end of the story and then you're going to review it and you choose whether you want to merge it or not. And then you go to the next. Okay, so that is a unit of work, a unit of code that you're going to review. We kept it to a good size, so there's not a lot of overhead. The next one, though, is you might ask about the BMAD loop, right? Where maybe you tell it, I want to do a whole epic. So it's going to do maybe, 4, 5, 10 stories in a row. What you're really taking on when you do that is how much you want to review together at the end, assuming you're going to go in there and actually review the code. So if you're asking yourself, should I do quick dev? Should I do BMAD loop where I do 5 stories all at once? Should I just use Fable and YOLO it and let it build my whole project? Really what you're talking about, and going way back an hour ago to what Alexey said that I think is so key that I wanted to comment on, is we are still humans in the loop and we are still reviewing the code. When he mentioned the human cognitive overload or overhead, I might have butchered the exact words that you used, but that's another thing to keep in mind. The more that you have to review all at once, it gets bigger and bigger the more you go. So if you're feeling the LLM is doing good, I would say keep it still scoped to an epic if you're going to do BMAD loop, because you got to review that stuff and you want to have the context of how to review it and understand it and really making sure it's giving you what you want. So that's kind of my 2 cents there, right? Of how you can decide whether you're going to, review at the end of a story, review at the end of a whole epic, or, something there in between. It's kind of up to you and how much you want to try to understand, is this good quality all at once?
So the way I see it is, like, first of all, this is changing all the time, right? Like, I can give you my answer today. It's going to be wrong in a month.
Of course, and every situation is even different. It's
if not in 15 minutes from now, right? Like
it could be, yeah.
But the thing is that basically how much human in the loop you want to do on any given change, or how often do you want to like inject your own attention into this, generative process, basically comes down to how many like questionable choices that LLM is not great at making are happening in a minute of inference. And for starters, this is like drastically changing from one generation from LLM to the next, right? So, like I can, in just like the last 12 months, I can count 4 or 5 errors pretty much where that answer changed like qualitatively, right? Not just like we went from 15 seconds to 25.
Mm-hmm.
We went from 15 seconds to 2 minutes or something like that. And like that's actually a drastic change. So point is that it also changes depending on what kind of work you're actually doing with the Gen AI, right?
Mm-hmm.
So generally, and again, like this is not a one-size-fits-all recipe that's going to stand for the rest of our lives. I don't think so. But
Yeah.
what I'm doing right now is going like this. Anytime I am creating a split by epic or within the epic split by story, I basically try to do it in such a way that as much design decisions and resolution of uncertainty happens on the left.
Yeah.
So as early as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of look at the story list, for example, in an epic that you created, and you're like, okay, and like most of the epics are like this, actually, in my experience, but not all.
Mm-hmm.
You go, I really want to pay attention to what it does in story one of this. And then the rest of it, because like story one creates the skeleton, like shoots the first tracer bullet through the whole thing. And the rest of it is just kind of slapping more meat on this bone. So basically, yeah, like same thing, but this extra, same thing, but this extra.
Mm-hmm.
But all the kind of real big choices have been made in story one.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the shape I can give to the epic, then what I do is I basically do like quick def, and sometimes I even actually do quick def with, like make this change, stop the coding agent, I'm going to look at it. I even do this, like even now, like I used to do it all the time before.
Mm-hmm.
A few months ago, that's kind of how I work. Now it's no longer required actually, most of the time, but sometimes I do it even that way. But anyway, basically I let it kind of run for one story. I really look at the result of that story, right? Then I go, okay, from now, stories like 2 to 10, just go do it to the end. I'm going to look at the end result.
Yeah.
One time out of 5, I would say, I end up looking at the end result. And like, keep in mind, at this point, we have spent like maybe an hour worth of inference on this stuff, right? Maybe 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And one time out of 5, I look at it and I go, yeah, I don't like this. So discard the whole thing. Keep in mind, it was all machine time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I didn't spend a second of my time until I started judging it and decided it was not good.
Yep.
It does happen. It happens often, actually, but not all the time. So basically, therefore, to me, like the risk of this happening is acceptable. And therefore, I can basically let it go for an epic. The problem with letting it go more than an epic is at a certain size of a diff, you can't reasonably review it.
I think that bar is going to keep changing. I think with LLMs, but I think generally you're correct for
okay,
right now.
now
If
we're
you want to
actually
review it,
human constraint, not LLM constraint.
yeah,
You can't review a 30,000 lines code change.
of course, you're
You
right.
can generate it in a day, but you can't review it.
Mm-hmm.
There's like absolutely no way you're gonna have attention span to read like thoroughly enough 30,000 lines of code in the same sitting. It's just not gonna happen.
Right. And that starts to get, this is a whole other topic for another day, because this starts getting into software factories, dark factories. How do we start removing humans from the loop, putting a more human on the loop, and where, what do we need to have in place where we do get to a point where it is spec in, working code out? Which code do we trust? Every feature is not the same. When you're talking about large production systems, there's a big difference between a ticket to create a CSS change that has low risk, and maybe you let that go all the way to production without even looking at it because you have good testing and good harnesses into place.
Really
And then and exactly right. And then you have some other riskier change where you want your humans to look at it. So it's all. Let's wrap this up, Alexey. But I got a really good question here from Linguisti. He asked, "Can the edge hunter and the other reviewers be run automatically?
They are run automatically. What do you
Okay,
mean?
so they're always run automatically. You're not having to tell it run the whole quick
No,
dev
no,
that
no,
we
no.
showed.
That's all part of the orchestration and the skill. So
Okay,
basically,
because the next question was, it asks me to manually post them into new windows. I wonder if that could be a. Oh, go ahead if you
okay,
know what that is.
there that says if your platform cannot do subagents, so that's a fallback for a platform that doesn't know how to do subagents.
So Linguisti, if you're still in the chat, it might be that you're using something that either doesn't have subagents or for some reason it doesn't understand our prompts that are telling it to use subagents.
So there is a specific like piece of text in that prompt that says if you don't know how to use subagents, right, just print those prompts out and ask the human to basically give it to some other session and bring back the answer. So
Got it. Okay,
what
good
is a
question
bad
there. Good
idea?
answer.
A bad idea is to run those things automatically within the same session. It can be done, but the results you're not gonna like. Because it's the same session at that point that wrote the code, right? Because like if your platform doesn't know how to use the agents, the coding agent happens on the main session, coding step. If the reviews happen on the same session, they're not gonna find half of the things that they're gonna find if it's a different session.
Yep.
It's I forgot what it's called. It's not confirmation bias. It's something else. But basically, the thing that's told to find problems in a session that's already reasoned that this was the right solution doesn't find problems.
Yeah, I
It
think
does,
it's just
but
it's like
not.
it's
It's
like
not.
a context bias that it has, and it's similarly related to the whole two different model problem, but not the exact same problem. But it's kind of the same thing. It's biased because it wrote the
At
code.
least it must be a different session. That's the thing. Like
Yeah.
it's better if it's a different model doing the different session, but it's pretty much like it's almost useless to run reviews in the same session that did the solution.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so definitely, however you do it, if you have to do it manually, do it in a separate session. There's probably a lot of other questions in here, but we're running a little long. I want to thank everybody that has joined this. Alexey, let's start wrapping it up here. This was a really good overview of QuickDev. I want to thank you for doing this with me. We'll have more. Alexey is around in the community. If you're not in the Discord, you can join there and talk to us in there. We're always answering questions, but we'll definitely do this again because there's a ton of other topics that we want to talk about, just related to how we're doing this in the real world, how we use BMAD actually at work every day, and how it's helping us get real stuff done. But Alexey, I want you to maybe wrap things up here. I'm going to ask you a final question, and that is, I want you to predict the future and tell me where we're going to be with LLMs in development 6 months from now. And then we're going to hold this to you. And we're going to come back in 6 months and see how close you got and make fun of you.
Let me go grab my crystal ball.
Yes, please. No, but where do you think we're going, Alexey? What do you think the near and the long-term future is that we're heading towards?
Okay. I don't know is the right answer. Is the only right answer, right? The kind of attempts to predict the future of technological development are the history of those attempts is very sad, as like anyone who ever looked at that history knows full well. Having said that, I would say it seems to me, right? Like that's all I'm claiming. That this whole story of we are soon gonna have, if not general artificial intelligence, then at least like coding agents that wouldn't need human in the loop for anything other than telling them what the hell the humans want. I don't think that's gonna happen. Not even in half a year. I don't think it's gonna happen until we figure out a better approximation of human intelligence than an LLM is, like fundamentally different something.
Mm-hmm.
How about that? So,
I like it.
Like, in other words, the optimistic is you're always going to have a job.
I think that's good. The job is going to change, but we're always going to need humans.
Already, it's drastically different from what I was doing a year ago.
Yeah. Yep, and it's going to continue to
The only
change.
button I need on my keyboard most of the time is the right command key, right?
Yeah.
Like the amount of typing I'm doing during the day is laughable by the standards of a year ago. It's just like I'm not typing, period.
Our keyboards are going to last longer. We're not banging on them as much, except for probably just one or two keys now, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I still have this, mechanical keyboard with blue switches, whatever, that I
Yeah.
paid $200 for, and it was great for all these years, but I no longer need it actually.
Are you a voice to text guy, or do you mostly type when you're coding, or both?
Basically, I don't type.
You do everything
Like
voice.
I say things and then maybe I edit them.
Uh-huh.
But generally speaking, the kind of current LLMs are so good at just cutting through dictation errors and, just kind of generic brain dump sort of thing that, you know, every once in a while I'm just staring at, what I said and what like Whisper or whatever. Like Whisper is not a very capable, thing, but like what it heard and gave to Cloud Code, and I'm like, holy, there's no way
Yeah.
Cloud Code is actually gonna understand it, but for shits and giggles, let's see if it does. And lo and behold, it does. Like that happens all the time.
Yeah, I'm a convert. I love to ramble. If anybody gets that idea from any of these live streams or videos that I do, but I love being able to just brain dump into Claude and let it pick out what I'm trying to say, do it for me,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's been a godsend. But I know some people are still getting used to it. Some people like to type, and so it's an interesting thing. It's kind of it's almost like tabs versus spaces is becoming keyboards versus voice input. Well, very cool. Well, thank you. No, I think I agree with you, Alexey. I think we're going to be needed for a long time. I think there's a lot of hype saying that we're not going to be needed. I don't think we're close to that. It's just our jobs are changing. This was a real pleasure talking to you. I want to thank everybody in the live chat for sticking around for this. We're going to wrap it up here, though. We will be back soon. We are going to be talking a lot about testing. I'm going to have Marat on in the next few weeks, and we'll be talking about the test enterprise architecture, evals, and just how testing really affects a lot of what we talked about today, how we really want to focus on testing. So that's going to be coming up soon. We're also going to be talking about agent voice, I think, in the next episode. That's going to be a really exciting one, how to get your agents talking. And we'll be talking to the creator of the Agent Vibe. So that's going to be a fun one, probably sometime next week. So thank you, everybody. My name is Brian. This has been BMAD Code Live. Number 2 is in the books. I want to thank Alexey, and we will see you all later. So thank you, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.